Welcome to another episode of Archetype Review. In this episode, we are going to be looking at the Agent archetype. The Agent archetype is, to be perfectly honest, a bit of an odd one. First of all, the archetype is actually relatively small, with a total of only 11 cards, included related cards, which I'll get into in just a little bit. But as far as what the cards are themselves, a bunch of the Agent monsters are actually primarily light attribute monsters and also fairy. There is one exception that is a dark attribute, of course, but that one was actually released later. Overall, the archetype started way back in the ancient Sanctuary days in very early Yu-Gi-Oh! And has since received very little support, with only a few related cards to it and one the Agent monster released as well, but aside from that, not really a lot of support. Overall, it's an archetype that has been heavily dismissed by Konami, which is a little unfortunate, but at the same time, maybe not necessarily so, because the archetype was never really that great to begin with. It is an interesting one regardless, because it does have to do with life points. Sometimes you can utilize effects when your life points are higher, or you can gain life points, essentially working around the theme of life points. Thematically, a few of these The Agent monsters actually do also utilize the Sanctuary in the Sky, a field spell that is now a little bit outdated and very underpowered, but has since received a better retrain. So we'll begin with three The Agent monsters, the first one being the Agent of Mystery Earth, followed by the Agent of Miracles Jupiter, and the Agent of Force Mars. The Agent of Mystery Earth is a light level 2 fairy tuner monster with 1000 attack and 800 defense. The effect says when this card is normal summon, you can add one The Agent monster from your deck to your hand except the Agent of Mystery Earth. While the Sanctuary of the Sky is faced upon the field, you can add one Master Hyperion from your deck to your hand instead. So Earth was actually one of the ones that was not released initially, because it is a tuner monster, meaning it was released later once the 5D's era had already begun. In addition, it is actually a search on summon, always a fantastic effect for any archetype, so that's good. And it also lets you get a Master Hyperion, which we will also get into in just a little bit, if of course the Sanctuary in the Sky is on the field. I will also discuss the Sanctuary in the Sky in just a little bit, but just know that there are two versions of it, one of them being vastly superior to the other. Overall, if you are running a complete The Agent deck for whatever reason, this is an obvious 3-of because it is essentially your primary searcher, and that's always a very good thing. Jupiter, however, is a light level 4 fairy monster with 1800 attack and 1000 defense. The effect says once per turn you can remove from play one The Agent monster in your graveyard to select one face-up light fairy type monster you control. The selected monster gains 800 attack until the end phase. While the Sanctuary in the Sky is face up on the field, once per turn you can discard one fairy type monster to select one of your banished light fairy type monsters and special summon it. So essentially the card does work pretty well if you do have the Sanctuary in the Sky on the field, mainly because you get to use each of its effects once per turn, essentially letting you banish one The Agent monster to basically power up a light fairy, more than likely another The Agent monster, while also then letting you discard a card to special summon that monster you just banished. Honestly, it's a pretty good combo. In addition to it having an 1800 attack being a primarily good beat stick compared to a lot of others, it's, to be perfectly honest, not the worst The Agent card in this archetype. So if you are going to be running a The Agent deck, this one is also one of the better ones in some ways. But again, I'm just reaching here. And lastly, Mars. This one is a light level 3 fairy monster with 0 attack and defense. The effect says, this card is unaffected by any spell cards. When you control a face-up the Sanctuary in the Sky, and your life points are higher than your opponent's, this card gains attack and defense by the difference between your and your opponent's life points. So Mars is not alone when it comes to utilizing specific effects that have to do with life points, but I'll just cut straight to the chase. It is very difficult to get this effect to work properly. The primary reason as to why is mainly due to the fact that if you're running the Agent cards, it is going to be very unlikely that you are going to be having a massive lead in life points compared to your opponent. While Mars has a good effect on paper, essentially being unaffected by all spell cards and potentially having some ridiculously powerful attack stats, keep in mind that you do need to have a lot more life points than your opponent to actually utilize this effect effectively. If this card in general just gained attack equal to the difference in life points whether you were under or over, that would be a much better effect, but I guess I can understand it being a little too good back in the ancient Sanctuary days, so I can't really completely blame Konami for that. Still though, because it's rather specific in terms of the potential power, it's honestly not a great one, so yeah, there's better ones. Let's move on to the next three. We have the Agent of Wisdom Mercury, the Agent of Judgment Saturn, and the Agent of Entropy Uranus. Mercury is a light level 4 fairy monster with 0 attack and 1700 defense. The effect says, during your standby phase, if you control this face-up card and had no cards in your hand at the end of your opponent's last end phase, draw one card. This is perhaps one of the most specific and worst draw one cards I've ever seen in my entire life. First of all, the effect will only trigger during your own standby phase. Keep in mind that this card has no effect protection such as spell traps or effect monsters. It can be targeted by effects, and it has 0 attack. The chance of this card surviving your opponent's turn is like less than 0.5% to be honest. On top of that, you also had to have no cards in your hand at the end of the opponent's last end phase, meaning you're basically going to draw one card, and then your standby phase lets you draw one other card, so you can play your main phase 1 with 2 cards. Oh man, scary. So scary. Seriously, what the fuck kind of underpowered effect is this? This is so ridiculous in so many ways. Just put a freaking Skell Angel, another light fairy monster that can let you draw one, but it has actual attack, 900, and just an overall better effect. Oh my god. Moving on to Saturn, this one is a light level 6 fairy monster with 2400 attack and 0 defense. The effect says, while your life points are higher than your opponent's, you contribute this card to inflict damage to your opponent equal to the difference. If you do not control a face up, the sanctuary, and the sky, this effect is not applied. You cannot conduct your battle phase the turn you activate this effect. Similar to Mars, that it depends on Sanctuary in the Sky and utilizes life points, it could be potentially powerful, but it is oddly specific. I will say that this card is overall a tad bit better than Mars, because it actually does have some pretty good stats. So worst case scenario, you are having a 1 tribute 2400 beat stick, which isn't the worst case in the world. And if used properly, the effect can actually lead to an OTK, as long as your life points are a lot higher, so there is that. But overall, the card is not a solid card, especially because of the fact that you are also sacrificing your battle phase if you use this effect, which means if you're not OTKing with the effect, you're kind of screwed. Yeah, so it's okay I guess, good stats and all, but it's an oddly specific effect. Uranus, however, is a dark level 5 fairy tuner monster with 2200 attack and 1200 defense. The effect says, if the Sanctuary in the Sky is on the field, you can special summon this card from your hand. Once per turn, you can send one the agent monster from your deck to the graveyard, and if you do, this card's level becomes the level of the monster sent to the graveyard by this effect. Level manipulation is fairly interesting, and it can be utilized in combination with cards outside of the agent archetype, but at least it is letting you mill cards into the graveyard from the deck directly. Essentially a once per turn archetype specific foolish burial, that's honestly pretty useful. The first effect is also very good if you are running Sanctuary in the Sky as a special summon from the hand. Well, again, that's not the worst thing in the world, that's actually fairly effective in most modern decks. Being a tuner does help it if you are running some synchro monsters, but just to let you know, there are no the agent archetype monsters that are synchro monsters, so you would have to run some outside of the agent. So yeah, overall I will say it's one of the better ones for sure, but to be fair, it is one of the later ones released in the archetype, and you can clearly tell that. You can clearly see that this was not a 2005 card, but more like a post-2011 card. And the very last agent is the Agent of Creation, Venus. This one is a light level 3 fairy with 1600 attack and 0 defense. The effect says you can pay 500 life points, special summon one mystical shine ball from your hand or deck. Venus is by far the most used agent card ever, and it's really because of the swarming capabilities. Essentially, it's not a once per turn paying 500 life points effect to special summon from the deck, so if you run Mystical Shine Ball, you get to special summon 3 of those in one turn. What's Mystical Shine Ball, you may ask? Well, here it is. It's a light level 2 fairy monster with 500 attack and defense. Yeah, it's a vanilla monster with pretty shitty stats, but here's the thing. If you're running 3 of these, and you have Venus out in the field, you pay your life points to bring 3 more. Thus, you actually have 4 monsters in one turn. Obviously, you're not going to be using those to attack or anything. Those are essentially going to be used for extra deck material. As a fun fact, Mystical Shine Ball is actually one of the most, if not the most used normal monster in the current game today. It's crazy that you would think that this little monster that came out in Ancient Sanctuary has so much potential in so many decks that it's actually utilized so effectively. In combination with powerful cards like Archlord Krista, it's actually a very good combo, as that one requires you to have exactly 4 fairy types in your graveyard. Thus, if you use this and bring those other 3 out, you have 4 fairies in the field. Use them all for some kind of extra deck summoning, and then bring out Krista because now you have exactly 4 fairies. It's exactly perfectly catered to Krista. It's ridiculous. Krista has 2800 original attack and it prevents special summoning. It's one of the best lockdown effects for being able to limit your opponent and using effects. So yeah, the possibilities of Venus and Mystical Shineball in combination are actually, I'm not going to say endless, but they are definitely up there, and which is why you definitely should be running Venus even in the Agent deck, and obviously in decks outside of the Agent, because it's very useful. Moving on to the field spell that keeps being mentioned in all these cards here, the Sanctuary in the Sky. It's a field spell that says, battle damage to the controller of a fairy monster from a battle involving that monster becomes 0. Very basic, very underpowered. I suppose it was useful back when it came out, but obviously it's been horribly outdated. However, I will let you know that there's actually a better version of it that was released so many years later, called the Sanctum of Parshath. This one is a continuous field spell that says, this card's name becomes a Sanctuary in the Sky while on the field or in the graveyard. Fairy monsters on the field gain 300 attack and defense. Set spells and traps cannot be targeted by or destroyed by card effects. Once per turn, you can target a total of 3 fairy monsters and or counter traps with different names in your graveyard. Place them on top of your deck in any order. The very obvious thing to know here is that this card is not just used specifically for the Agent decks, but it's actually just big fairy support in general. The card is used in heavy combination with Parshath decks or counter fairy decks, which were actually a big thing back then, and that's why it has all these really odd effects that you may see in the second half of its effect, because again, it's not specific to the Agent. It does offer some nice protection for set spells and traps while also granting a decent bonus to your fairy monsters, so that's pretty useful. Overall, if you are going to be running the Sanctuary in the Sky, it just makes sense to run this one over the old one. The one and only downside I will say is that Terraforming cannot search this because it's not a field spell, and that's really the only advantage that the original Sanctuary in the Sky does have, but hey, you gotta pick your poison here. And the very last card in the archetype is Master Hyperion. It's a light level 8 fairy monster with 2700 attack and 2100 defense. The effect says you can special summon this card from your hand by banishing one the Agent monster from your hand, field, or graveyard. Once per turn, you can banish one light fairy type monster from your graveyard, then target one card on the field. Destroy that target. While the Sanctuary in the Sky is on the field, you can activate this effect up to twice per turn. Keep in mind that this card came around during the 5Ds era, and to be perfectly honest, it has not aged horribly. It has a pretty good special summoning condition, a pretty good once per turn destruction effect, which is also really good, and it also works in combination well with another Agent card that I mentioned before that has to do with banishing, known as Jupiter. The Sanctuary in the Sky is not completely mandatory for this guy to be on the field, so that's cool, but if it's on the field, then hey, you get to use the effect twice, which is obviously a very good thing. Yeah, it's a boss monster that, despite it being a little bit old, again, it's not the most outdated thing in the world, so it is actually pretty useful still. So if you are running specifically a complete The Agent deck, then yes, this card is definitely going to be going in there. But if you're not, then probably not, because you cannot special summon this thing by any means, which means you would have to resort to other ways to bring it out. Okay, and that actually about covers it for the Agent archetype. So as a quick reminder, there's Earth, Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, Saturn, Uranus, and Venus. So because all of these are representing different planets, the one that is actually missing is Neptune. Pluto technically is too, but keep in mind that it's no longer a planet officially anymore, although I will say, back in the ancient Sanctuary days when the archetype first started, Pluto was still a planet, which means they chose not to release one for Pluto despite it being a planet. Which means you can probably expect Neptune to be released sometime soon. I'm not really sure when. I mean, they eventually did release Uranus, so that's cool. But yeah, that's about it for that. Obviously, if you're going to be running the Agent deck, you do want to utilize the Sanctuary and the Sky cards in combination with Master Hyperion, and obviously run 3 Mystical Shine Balls because Venus is going to be your lifesaver. The ones that I would say are better are definitely Earth, Venus, Uranus, and to a slighter extent, I would say Jupiter. The ones that are a little less useful would be Saturn and Mars, and the one that's horrible is Mercury. But that's about it. So the archetype started in Ancient Sanctuary and has not received so much support since, as there's a total of 11 cards. And it's really difficult to give strategic advice as far as how to use this effectively, because you don't really have much to work with here. I will say that just running light fairy decks in general is actually not a bad option, and putting some of these in there, especially Venus. As I mentioned before, cards like Archlord Crystal are actually pretty good, and just counter fairies in general are not a bad deck. There's definitely other cards you can use that also work well with the Sanctuary and the Sky, such as the Parshath cards, floaters such as Nova Summoner, and so on and so forth. But that is about it. Sorry for a rather shorter video, but this archetype doesn't really have much to offer here and it's a little unfortunate, but that concludes this video. So as always, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye bye everyone, have a great and a fantastic day.